Hello and welcome. Today I'm sharing the story of my daughter's birth. My daughter was born 3 years ago in 2022, and she was born 5 weeks early. So this story begins when I am about 34 and a half weeks pregnant, and just 2 weeks before she and I were diagnosed with growth restriction, which basically means that by the beginning of my third trimester, they wanted the baby to be bigger than she was. For that time, they wanted her to be between like 5 and 5.5 pounds, and Layla was only 3.5 pounds. So they had asked that I would come into the hospital twice a week rather than once a week, check on the baby and make sure that she was doing fine. And we went in together, together, of course, she's in my belly. We went in 4 times over those 2 weeks. And on our fourth visit, um, my daughter had made it finally into that head down position where she was more prepared for birth. And I was starting to show signs of elevated blood pressure. So, that normal range for most folks is I believe 120 over 80. For pregnancy, it's a little bit higher, and I was just inching outside of that range in the low 140s. So, being a little bit competitive, I asked that they would do my blood pressure again. I had never had anything that high, even earlier in my pregnancy, and I thought it might be I thought it might be an error. I thought it might have been a mistake, and they told me that they had planned to run it again anyway. And they didn't do a simple blood pressure cuff. They hooked me up to the same kind of machine that they had used initially when we were checking in on Layla. And after 20 or so minutes of measurement, they ended the test. They came back in and said, "You need to go check into the emergency department. It's one floor up, and you're going to stay there until you give birth." And I said, "Well, I'm not due for like 5 more weeks. Normal gestation is 40 weeks, and I'm just shy of 35 weeks." And they said, "They know." But internally, I'm wondering, well, do I live at the hospital now, or am I getting ready to have my baby? Um, so we go ahead and check in. I have a doula. We had hired a doula. I had a totally different birth plan. I wasn't even using a regular OB-GYN. Our hospital had an entire department of midwives and all these beautiful whirlpools, these beautiful little suites with whirlpools. And I'm like, that's how I want to do it. I want her to arrive when she's ready and be born into this warm pool with just her mom and her dad. And boy, was I in for a really different, really different story. So I'm on the phone with the midwife, or I'm sorry, the doula, and I'm saying, "I think that there's a mistake. I feel totally fine. I feel normal. I feel good. And are you sure I'm meant to be here?" So the doula came over. She was there within an hour or two. Um, it's starting to become later in the afternoon. I haven't eaten since 11 or so. I went in for a 1 o'clock appointment, and now we're edging closer to like 3 and 4 o'clock. Um, at some point, the memories have become very jumbled, but at some point, I was given Pitocin to begin the process of induction. So I was now induced, and my body is starting to prepare itself to naturally deliver Layla. Um, but as the preeclampsia worsened and my blood pressure climbed higher and higher, at one point I was in like the 170s, which sounds just astronomical. I was moved into another room, and I remember being so impacted by, I think they were giving me a magnesium drip. I'm feeling my body go through these processes and changes that aren't natural. They're all pharmaceutically induced. And I have my big pregnant belly, but I'm curled into a ball and I'm puking in a bag. And I told my husband, I'm like, "I'm in a lot of pain." You go get someone. And a nurse or a doctor came over and they're like, "Oh yeah, the you're starting to feel the contractions." And I said, "Are they supposed to be up here?" And I'm like pointing at the basically the lowest part of my rib cage, and they kind of made this like, "Oh shit" face. Um, and over the next several minutes, they discovered that I was developing HELLP syndrome, which is incredibly rare. It's actually so rare that they don't even really tell mothers about it because the odds of developing it are super, super low. It's like less than 1%. I want to say it's something like half of a percent, or maybe it's even lower than that. But in HELLP syndrome, your liver enzymes become elevated. Something's going on with your platelets as well. And so I was having these liver enzymes just going awry. And one of the professionals came over to me and said, "You need to make some choices. With the development of HELLP syndrome, your chances of having a stroke are extremely elevated. So we can either get you prepared to have a C-section. And of course, with that comes the epidural, which is the way that they numb you so that you can't feel the incision. Another thing that I did not plan on having at all. That was option number one, was a C-section. Or they said, we can wait until things get so bad and put you under anesthesia and you have a twilight birth where you're completely knocked out, um, and essentially asleep for your baby's delivery. And I said, well, those both sound terrible, um, but I did consent to the C-section. I was just terrified. I was so scared. They they prepped me. It was getting close to midnight, and I was brought in for my C-section. And between the medication and the cold operating room, I was just shaking. I was shaking so hard that I remember stretching my arms out and grabbing onto the table just to keep myself still. When you're shaking that hard, you're like hurting yourself. Um, so the C-section itself was very short. It was maybe 45 minutes from beginning to end, and the incision portion of it was a few minutes. And another deviation from my birth plan of just mom and dad and maybe the midwife they were supporting. There were like 12 people in the room. There were all these doctors. There were the doctors doing the incisions and the delivery. There was an anesthesiologist. There were all these medical students and residents. It was truly, from my end, pretty unusual, just not what I had prepared for or what I wanted or what I expected. Um, but despite the growth restriction and the preeclampsia and the HELLP syndrome, I delivered our healthy baby girl at on Friday the 13th, just after midnight. And she was so tiny. Layla was born 3 pounds, 9 ounces. She was so itty bitty. Um, but she was totally healthy. And although she spent 19 days in the NICU, that was only half of the amount of time that they had predicted. Usually, they want these babies to go home that are born prematurely. They want them to go home close to their delivery date, um, to ensure their health and make sure that everything is is just fine. Layla came home early. She was perfectly healthy. She was little. We had to wait until she met certain criteria for coming home. She needed to be able to keep her own body warm at like a normal indoor temperature. She needed to maintain her weight. Once we got to a full 4 pounds, that's when that clock started. They wanted to make sure that it didn't dip below 4 pounds for a few days. And 19 days after I delivered her, I took I took her home. She was so little. and had a lot of emotions about not giving her the delivery that I wanted her to have, one that was so peaceful and devoid of as much trauma as I could control for. And I gave her what was very much the opposite. And with a couple months' time, I started to look back and process and see this storm of events for what it was. I had a growth restricted baby that wasn't getting enough nutrients. I delivered her early. I help her co regulate and find a sense of peace. We all come in with trauma, and I've done and continue to do my best to give her a really healthy system to start with. And, she'll go on her own healing journey and have more things to heal from. Some of them, unfortunately, from me. Um, but we all have something. And I got to see this little baby just plump right up and watching her gain weight so rapidly, going from third percentile for weight to 11th percentile at her 1 month checkup, I believe it was, and then 22nd percentile at her 4 month checkup, where she was now um, quite healthy, quite obviously healthy. Um, it just highlighted to me how divine this whole situation was. That this situation where I became sick caused her early delivery, but it also gave us the ability to more swiftly get her the nutrients that she needed rather than continuing with a pregnancy knowing that she might not have been able to access the nutrients that she would have needed. And I imagine her, if she had been in my body longer, just losing weight and how much more challenging that may have been. And whether or not that's a helpful thought for everyone, it's something that has brought me a sense of peace and a sense of clarity as we go forward and we continue on. Layla's now 3. We call her 3 Rex. She's beautiful and smart and adventurous, and she's so funny, and she's very strong-willed. She's ever so willing to assert her her opinions, which is it's really cool to see. It's not always the easiest, but it's really cool to see this little girl's spirit and her strength. So, if you are going through some challenges in your pregnancy, or maybe you've just delivered, or whatever the case is, um, there is greater health that hopefully I pray will await you and your little one. And so, friends, that's what I have for you today. I meant to put this out closer to Mother's Day. Um, First, I planned to do it closer to Layla's birthday, then Mother's Day, then Father's Day, and now it's just out when it's out. So I wish you incredible love, and until next time, my friends.